Right. Technology careers come in many different forms, and on today's episode of The Modern Job Hunt, we'll be diving deep into the world of agencies. So, I'd like to welcome onto the show Rebecca, Josh, and Reese. And Rebecca is a relative newcomer to agency life. Since graduating with a Master's of Library and Information Studies from the University of British Columbia's School of Library, Archival, and Information Studies in 2011, Rebecca has been working as an information architect with the UX design space as an in house employee, a consulting firm based consultant, and as an self employed consultant. So then we have Josh. Josh is a C suite agency executive with 20 years' experience, having worked in Canada, the US, and Australia. He has an expertise spanning advertising, media, experiential content, and digital. He's passionate about increasing LGBTQ2 plus and other marginalized people's representation in leadership roles, along with Reese. So Reese has a decade of experience in recruitment, specializing in dynamic landscape of technology, currently serving as the head of talent acquisition at ThoughtWorks Canada. Reese plays a pivotal role in attracting, retaining top tier talent at one of the world's foremost technology consultancies. So I will quickly put up their QR codes. So if you're looking to follow along and learn more about Rebecca, that's Rebecca's LinkedIn, followed by Josh's. So that is Josh, and I will put these up at the end as well. And then we have Reese. All right. So we're going to deep dive into their stories about their agency world experience. So we'll start with Rebecca. And so Rebecca, can you tell the audience a little bit more about how you got involved in agency work?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So like you mentioned, I'm still pretty new to agency life. I've dabbled in agencies previously, but I have recently joined Oliver Agency as of January of this year. But prior to that, I was working in-house with one of the Canadian telcos. How did I stumble into agency life? I was looking for a job and it came up on LinkedIn. And so I applied and started the interview process, and a little bit hesitant about agency life to start with. I know that agencies have kind of gotten a bad rap at times about kind of work-life balance, which is something that's really important to me. But I did a little bit more digging into kind of the way Oliver sets itself up, and it's very different from a lot of other agencies. And throughout the interview process, I was just really blown away by the quality of people I was speaking with, the diversity and just variations of people and walks of life. And I was hooked right from day one.
Thank you.
How about you, Reece?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, much appreciated. My lens from an agency perspective is more so related to the recruitment side. So, as you can tell, I'm not Canadian. I was originally born and raised in England. Cut my teeth in agency type recruitment in London. Then had the opportunity to come to Canada and actually start working with a small startup in the consultancy landscape called Connected. And they were basically an end-to-end product development company in the IT and services space within Toronto. So joined there as an early stage employee. And then we had the opportunity to build Connected up to where it had the acquisition from ThoughtWorks roughly around 2 years ago. So ThoughtWorks being a global technology consultancy, as Ryan sort of alluded to, we can really see the more agency setting being that consultative side. And yeah, looking forward to deeping more into that today. And then I'll pass it over to Josh.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Ryan. So I started my career in agency world about 20 years ago, and I actually started as a receptionist in Toronto, working at an actual reception board back when we had those. So I've worked at large global agencies, WPP twice, IPG, so some of the world's largest communications companies, and then I've also worked for small independents. So I started in Toronto, and actually did a year in Australia, and then I came back and worked in Canada and the US again. And so I'm now located in Vancouver. And as you mentioned, Ryan, I've worked across traditional advertising agencies at JWT, and an agency in the US called BWM, or in Australia, sorry, and then in some local agencies, content marketing, digital. So my experience is everything across the board, I would say, when it comes to agencies, and really have a passion for developing people and business growth and business strategy.
Josh, I think we have some things in common because I started as a receptionist as well.
You know what? It's in any career, it's beneficial to start at the the entry level, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you
Gives
learn
you
a
a little
lot.
bit of humility, and yes, you definitely learn a lot.
I had 200 extensions memorized by the time I left that role at JWT.
Okay, you're a far better receptionist than I ever was.
So yeah.
And I think that shows like the kind of diversity of entrances, and so we've got receptionists and then like coming out of acquisitions and other things, and really I think one of the things that I'm interested in is like the differences in skills versus someone that works in a kind of traditional employed role. So when I worked with you, Josh, at a Canadian telecom, I was always surprised because I'm like, how do these guys work with me full time and they have their other internal work like that, which takes time, and all of those different there's just an extra layer of skills that I think are needed when you have to work both for the client and for your internal business, and
Yeah.
you have those two
Juggling. This is
different
me
sets.
juggling balls.
So yeah, Josh, because I referenced you, like when you're looking at someone that you're bringing into an agency, what is the difference when you're like, can this person survive and thrive in this environment versus an employee environment?
Yeah. So jack of all trades. I think on one of the very first roles that I posted, we had a picture of somebody juggling, and it was like an entry-level account executive role. So this was some time ago, but you do have to be able to be a bit of a jack of all trades, in that you're going to be working with a lot of different people, personalities, and departments, right? So you work with everything from finance to technology to account service, strategy. And so you need to be able to work with those different personalities and departments really well. And also agency side, the variety of client. So like at my last agency, we had upwards of 20 different clients, and not every single person is touching every single account. Some of the project managers are running 5 or 10 different clients. And so that every single client has their own personality and their own way of doing business. And so adaptability is huge, being able to adapt and, just manage, different, the ebbs and flows of the work as well. Right. So.
And Reece, as a recruiter, when you're looking at a CV, how do you balance kind of fitting a specialized need in the business versus that adaptability that Josh referenced?
Yeah, great points that Josh mentioned, and echoing and adding to that, I think 2 big things we look for when speaking with candidates for a consultancy is, one, a challenger mindset, because again, we're having to go into these clients and sometimes they're not always in the best shape, right? We're having to be that subject matter expert when it comes to the products which we're delivering. Again, especially being high value and high price per some aspects, and being a consultancy, you have to be able to have that challenger mindset to be able to push back at times. So that's something that we screen for, and touch on that adaptability, having a more agnostic skill set. And what I mean by that is trying to not be sort of a master of one and a jack of all. So that juggling kind of meme comes back again, but someone that can actually work across a variety of different clients, different technologies, different skill sets. They're the people we see that tend to do very, very well. And it's always a question I ask people throughout our interview process is, you want to work for a pure product company or a consultancy? Because it's a big difference in where you want to be. So yeah, they're the big things that we look for.
that needs to excite the person, right? So like the idea of working on 5 different clients is really like that engages them. They're excited by that, as opposed to working on one brand, one piece of business. Very different.
And my agency experience has been very different because the model that Oliver uses is that we are one team embedded within one client, right? And so I don't bounce from one client to the next, which I actually really like. And from an experience design perspective, it's really helpful to be able to become immersed in one brand and one client, as opposed to trying to remember, oh yeah, like this client's doing this and this one's doing that. I think it's just like the holistic need. But Reece, what you said about the challenger mindset is absolutely bang on. I've always said, like, if they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't be hiring agencies to help them out, right? So in a lot of ways, you do coach and mentor a lot. And that's something that I had recognized from some of my consulting experiences before as something that I love doing. And I love helping people to, when that light bulb moment happens, it's just like, oh, this feels so good. So that was a big part of what drew me back into this type of a model.
And I think like one of the things that is interesting is they're both paying you, but they also want an impactful output. And so I think this is something I've seen really interesting. One of your colleagues, Josh, in your last company, was really good at this, because I found sometimes I would push back on something and they would push back on me, but it's a fine line, because they want you to be happy as the client, but yet you're trying to build something together. So there's really strong people skills required there to understand, like, 100%. Okay, how far can I push this while making the client happy at the same time?
Yeah, the word is assertive. So I teach my team members to be assertive, and assertive while being polite and kind, right, and considerate. So assertive with clients, assertive internally with your team members, because you are all working towards the same outcome. You want the same thing. And I think I'll add to a passion and a really actually being interested in what the clients are trying to achieve, what their business objectives are, what the end goal is. Sometimes in agencies, you lose sight of that because you're so focused on your own job and role. It's like the end goal is still 6 months away until you launch that campaign or that website or whatever it is. So are really actually interested in helping the clients achieve their business objectives, which in the instance that you're referencing, Ryan, we very much were, because we had a dedicated team working on that piece of business, and they were kind of breathing it day in and day out, if you will. So, yeah.
And I'm going to throw this one out to the floor, and you guys can kind of jump in, whoever wants to go first. But what are the most common mistakes professionals make when they're transitioning from employment to agency life?
I'm happy to start if you want. I'm happy to. I can talk from recruitment lens, and I think it's what we see is people assuming and not asking enough questions. I think especially when it comes to dealing with clients, especially if you're newer to the agency life, is you may have a brief, may have the project, what wants to be done, but there needs to be a lot more upfront work to actually understand your client's pain points before, and actually getting to know them as a person, and that will make that whole journey a lot easier. So from what I've seen is people that don't ask many questions and aren't prepared to have the mindsets we aforementioned seem to struggle.
Yeah, I think obviously through asking questions and being curious and inquisitive through the interview process at all touch points, right? Like if you're working with a recruiter, the hiring man, like the HR manager might be a touch point, the hiring manager. It's always good to, if you're able to, depending on how far along in the process you are, be able to ask to talk to a team member that you would be working closely with. And so, really getting a sense of what the workloads are like, the workload is like, the clients are like, the culture, all that kind of stuff, to Reece's point.
And that's never been easier to do either. Like I just go on LinkedIn and I'll find someone that works at the company and see if I have like a mutual connection. And
Exactly.
people are so lovely and always
Yeah.
willing to introduce to people who they think would, get on well. So I think leverage your professional network to get the answers you need to know if this is the right choice for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll kind of go into agency models for a little bit. So I know that there was already two different views. One with Rebecca going full time, in house, embedded, and then that's the model. I've actually, while at TELUS, I interacted with both models. With Power Shifter as one company that interacted with multiple clients at the same time, and then ThoughtWorks was the other main client that TELUS had, and you guys were very embedded. Are there any others that kind of come to mind? I don't know the kind of diversity of agency models.
Those would be the main ones. So like when I started, the Oliver model is newer. So when I started in the business, I don't believe that model really existed, or if it did, it wasn't very common. And what happened over time is there's a variety of different reasons of why that model has evolved and become successful. Predominantly, it's that marketers wanted more control over team members and the campaign work that's being done. And so back when most people were in offices, it was beneficial to have people embedded in the agency. So embedded in the marketing team in-house, as it's referred to, and close, sitting closer for synergies. And obviously that's still the case with remote work, but for the most part, and then when you're not embedded, a couple of different models are a retainer model agency and then project-based. And some agencies are fully retainer model, so that the client pays the agency on a retainer to retain either full-time people, so full FTEs or part FTEs, or fully project-based, so they're just paid by project. And then a lot of agencies are a mix of both. So some clients are retainer and some are project-based, or a particular client is part of the business is retainer and parts project-based. But I would say, that's predominantly how agencies are set up. And then the Oliver model, there's definitely a few more of those types of agencies that have come up in the last kind of 5-10 years.
And I think too, with agencies that are doing experience design work as opposed to more traditional advertising and marketing work, that experience design work takes immersion to really understand. And so that's, I think, why the Oliver model really appealed to me in particular, was because you do get that immersion, that exclusive look into that one particular client. And I think that as more agencies take on experience design as one of the services that they offer, you'll be seeing more of that.
Yeah.
And when it comes to staffing these projects, I'm gonna pass this one to Reece. How do you make sure that someone's just come off a project, or someone's still on a project, and another project would be really well suited for their skill set? How do you kind of keep the whole, I don't know if you do both internal recruiting as in project to project and external as in bringing them into ThoughtWorks, but I imagine that's hard, keeping everyone busy and on the work that they like all the time.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, it's a very, very fine balance, to be honest, and having the more proactive versus reactive. I think for any consultancies is something we battle with all the time, because at the end of the day, our selling point is our people, right? For consultancy. So you don't want too many for the amount of projects, and you don't want not enough, right? So we have something called a beach, and the beaches sounds lovely, but that's kind of where you'll be between projects. So there's a lot of opportunities for upskilling. There's opportunities maybe to get cross-trained onto the new projects which you want to go on to. So it's very multifaceted. We try to take a view in advance. There's always going to be reactive hires for sure. A client might come to us and they need something ASAP, but we try to take the lens of who will come off a project in 2 months' time, when's this project started, and then we try to mix and match that kind of internally. And it's done for a variety of different ways. Skill sets, conversations are had with employees as well to see if that's something they're interested in doing. And then from an external recruitment standpoint, we try to look for trends. So for an example, at the moment, data is massive, it's everywhere in technology. So we're looking at, okay, where can we get ahead of the market in regards to hiring for data? We may not have actually projects available, but we know if we hire these folks, then we'll be able to sell them into clients because it's such a hot skill and hot demand. So it's a constant to and fro, and it's very, very hard. We do have utilization targets, whereas we want people to be utilized X amount of time. We have beach targets where we only want a certain number of people. So it's a constant juggle with that side. But short answer is trying to be as proactive as possible in both staffing and recruiting.
Yeah, it's it can be a full-time job. I'm thinking to my past agencies, the ones that were over 100 people, we had a creative resources coordinator and or manager, and literally that full-time role is to traffic work and to manage resources and to make sure that, to Reece's point with utilization, that the teams are being utilized. So that's more for what we refer to as shared services, so strategy and the creative teams. But yeah, it's totally a full-time job. And then if you don't have that role, so for some of the smaller businesses under 50 people, that role, you might not have that specific role. So different people take it on. Sometimes the project manager might take that on, resource planning, or the leadership team. Yeah.
And I think too, the employee can play an important role in this too. And I think it shows a level of curiosity and proactivity when, for example, earlier this week, I was on an internal Oliver call, and someone else spoke up, and they were also located in Calgary. And so I reached out and they said, hey, what projects are you working on? Who are your clients? And then he and I had, a half-hour conversation yesterday about, okay, if things start winding down with my clients and I'm no longer being needed, where might there be some opportunities on his team, or does he know anybody? And trying to build those connections internally is something that I think a lot of employees should do more of.
Yeah, just adding to that, and agree more with Rebecca's point there. It's kind of alludes back to a couple of questions ago and what makes someone successful in agency. And the people that we've seen be very successful are the individuals that do exactly what Rebecca says, actually go above and beyond, identify these trends, and maybe even see a project coming up that we hadn't even recognized them for. Upskilling, maybe their skills are slowed down a little bit in the market. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to upskill and then position themselves forward for them projects. So them types of individuals we've seen have been top tier.
And in terms of that upskilling, I'd never heard of the beach or downtime upskilling concept, but that Reece mentioned. But do you typically have a manager at an agency that is like a people leader that guides your career? And how does that work when you're kind of potentially on projects far away from that manager, or do you kind of move with your manager project by project? How does that kind of work in these environments?
Yes, I have a line manager, and she is the account director for the project that I'm currently on. So if I was to move to a new client, I would likely have someone new that I report directly into. But we have biweekly one-on-ones, and it's entirely focused on career, not on client or project.
Yeah.
And it's up to me as the employee to say, these are the things I'd like to talk to you about today. These are the opportunities I'd like to hear more about. I drive that conversation. I also have two people that report directly to me as well, and I encourage them as well to set the agenda. You tell me what it is you need me to help you with, or to help facilitate to get your career where you want it to be.
Yeah. And typically, if people are good at recording things, these discussions are recorded, in a whatever the agency uses. If it's the biweekly one-to-one sheets, and then a quarterly check-in, and then your annual performance review. And then to Rebecca's point, if you do move on to a different department or team, then that written record is there for the next manager to take over and kind of run with, to help that individual continue to progress. And then speaking from a like a leadership team perspective, typically leadership teams will have a sight on everyone's development at a higher level, of course, not into the deep, but oftentimes, especially when you get into much larger agencies with several hundred people, people are constantly moving around. So there's typically a lot of opportunity for individuals to switch clients after a while, work on a project that they're interested in, so on. And so leadership teams can and should have a view into all of that. Yeah.
And then in terms of like compensation at agencies, how does that differ from employment? It's typically base salary. Sometimes there's a bonus at the end, and there's in tech, there's often equity, be it either RSUs or options. Agencies obviously have a very different structure. So how does the compensation shift when someone is moving into an agency role?
Yeah, I'll start by saying there's a term referred to as total compensation, which I think that employers use, but I don't hear employees kind of use that term a lot. And so total compensation refers to everything that your package your contract includes, right? So, and it may include, but it's not limited to, base salary, potential bonuses, office perks, like hybrid working these days, right? Benefits, healthcare spending accounts, like all that kind of. So one of my pieces of advice to people who are interviewing is to ask what total comp looks like, because base salary is oftentimes just one piece of that, right? And so obviously people are very focused on base salary because that's what helps them pay their bills and pay the rent and the mortgage. But to your point, Ryan, like, depending on the role and depending on the organization, the bonus can be a larger, if there's a bonus available, it can be larger than other agencies pay, that kind of thing. So it's important to obviously, more typically when you're down the line of the interview process. That said, I also in BC, we now have a law that base salary needs to be posted, a range needs to be posted for, I think it's for organizations over a certain amount of people, 100 people or so. So that's giving transparency to salaries, which is great. So people can do some really good research as they're applying for roles, right?
Yeah. So it sounds quite. So I'll let you talk about them in a second, but it sounds like it's actually quite similar to employment. So people making the shift ask very similar questions. But yeah, I'll let you kind of top up, Reece.
No, that's going to say there's not much difference from what I'm seeing now. Our general compensation packages for full-time staff, what I'm seeing in the market, very similar in regards to structure, which is base salary, RSP matching, RSUs, and things like that. I think the only time it differs, which is probably industry standard anyway, is if we bring someone on a contract, where it's we pay them hourly and then they have no benefits. So that's the only difference we see.
Yeah. Gotcha. And in terms of time in your career, I've known people that have gone to agencies for a few years because the diversity of work that they can get in 2 years is something you just can't get at one employer. So but yet some of you have been with agencies for your entire career. So how do you view kind of timing and agencies? This is I guess there's the lifelong path, and then there's some people that do the kind of stints.
Yeah, for me, I've bounced around between many different types of employment, including owning my own consulting company for many years. And I still have a legal corporation that I own and operate, so that if the next opportunity that comes my way, if it's set up to be done on a contract type basis, I can do that. It just gives me ultimate flexibility as a fairly senior level individual contributor. For me, I really value the ability to be adaptive in terms of what my hiring contract or method of employment is. And so I'm not committed to agency life for the rest of my life, but who knows, maybe, one great opportunity after the next will keep me in agency land for longer than I think I might. So I think it's just kind of depending on what appeals to you at a given time.
Agreed. Yeah, and it's timing. Oftentimes, timing is everything, right? So the right agency with the right leadership team with the right manager is right, and so you land, and the right clients, and you land at an agency, and you like I've known people stay at agencies for 10, 15 years. And it's just like they've got a really good thing going, right? And then other people that, yeah, after a couple of years, it's either going to another agency to progress in their career role, or going client side because they're interested more in understanding the marketing side of things versus agency. But yeah, being excited about the unknown of the future is is key, I think.
Anytime someone asks me what my 5-year plan is, I'm like, I don't even know. Like,
right?
So much happens in 5 years. Who knows where I'm going to wind up?
Yeah. If people are still asking you that in interviews, it's not good, because no one knows their 5-year plan. It's like yeah, we've all been asked that question, and I'm the same. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And my next question is kind of like agency life of the past versus agency life of the present. Like, I know, having worked with your agency, Reece ThoughtWorks, now you've got an account manager in BC, someone else in Toronto, then you've got a team in Ecuador and a team in Brazil, and like it's kind of like agency world is global from the start, I think, and which is very different than kind of maybe 15, 20 years ago. So how do you feel like in the last 5 years the agency world has changed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, yeah, the remote and hybrid element of it has changed massively, to be honest, especially with the now availability of cross-regionalized teams. I think that's been a huge benefit and drawback of agency worlds, to be honest, because now clients are starting to see, oh, we don't need people in person 24/7, right? We don't need these teams to be in the same location. So I think from a business lens, it's pros and cons for agencies and consultancies. Pros being the fact that there's a lot more individuals that we can utilize in projects, but then also a lot of companies now will look to use areas which are lower cost, which I think also throws off the business element of it, right? So where we was extremely successful as a Canadian business is we was a nearshore partner to the US. So Canadian talent, big advocate for Canadian talent, but we was a nearshore partner to the US, right? So rates are traditionally cheaper. Now we're starting to see the more distribution of teams. So for an example, a lot of now of that work can be outsourced to LATAM, right? Where the talent is extremely strong, but it's a similar kind of model. So I think that's changed from like the business element, but that's also positive as well, because we're able to actually grow in markets where we couldn't have grown before. We're able to actually cross-staff teams from different regions now. So I think it's changed a lot in that retrospect. And I can speak more from a recruitment lens as well. It's been great. From 2020 to 2024, the diversity of the talent that we can now hire, because we don't have to be in a 10-mile radius of Toronto.
Yeah.
We can now hire Canada-wide. We can even hire in different areas that I'm being English, never heard of before, so I've had to get the map out a couple of times. But it's been, from a recruitment lens, it's been brilliant. The talent that we've been able to hire 2020 to 2024 has been night and day.
I can imagine.
And that's not exclusive to agencies either, right? Like, I was in-house previously, and they were starting to do a lot of remote work. I had the good fortune of being able to live really close to my sister and her kids for a few years because I was able to work remotely. So it's not just agencies that are benefiting from that.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I'm checking. The office is where? You want me to drive where? It's like, I've had those conversations. I'm not going to drive an hour and a half to get to outside of Toronto. Yeah, it's super interesting. I was reading something recently that business travel is hit it for this year will exceed pre-pandemic levels. So, and so I'm thinking, okay, so you've got a lot of people working hybrid. They're not really getting together in person anymore. So what's probably becoming more common is, annual or biannual get-togethers, which agencies are doing so that the teams can, so offsites, so teams can get together and meet in person and get to know one another better and do team building activities. Maybe it's a holiday, the annual holiday party, whatever it is. So I wonder if that's kind of more the future of work too, right? But we're also seeing RTO, return to office, where a lot of employers are requesting 3 days a week back in office. I would say that's more client side than agency. Agencies generally are a little more flexible, but there are some of the larger agencies that are asking that as well. Because they have large offices and campuses that are, they're paying rent for. And they also want their teams together. There's definitely improvement in collaboration, generally speaking, when people are physically together, at least for a bit.
Great. Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. We're seeing clients want to have people in front of them in person more and more, as we're starting to progress, which is great in a lot of times. And we've actually found from internal employees, they've missed that actual interaction. There's a lot of work that we do that is a lot more impactful and meaningful when you can get individuals in a room. So yeah, we're starting to see that value add of in-person interaction starting to increase.
Yeah, Oliver's actually been really careful with that too, recognizing that there is value to being in person. So on most of the teams they put together now, they try to have at least 1 or 2 key people on the team be located in the same city as the client. So for example, I spent 4 hours on a Zoom call this morning where 3 of my colleagues were sitting in a room with our client in Chicago, and then myself and one other colleague were on the line. And yeah, finding ways to kind of work with that and finding that kind of balanced model is becoming more and more prevalent, I think.
Very, very hybrid and very different from 20 years ago when every single meeting that I had to be in person. Yeah. I was taking a lot of taxis and subways to get to client meetings. But yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, how does that kind of vary by role, the remoteness? But it sounds like Rebecca Oliver's finding a sweet spot where you could have a designer in Chicago and they chair the meeting with the client, and you have, your account manager might be in Calgary, and across many projects that actually kind of figures itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. There are certain roles that are hard to fill. There are not a lot of information architects, for example, who are out there looking for work. And so when you can have that ability to hire remotely, but then also have those key people that can come into the office as needed, it's been really beneficial for that.
It's an easy, it's not really a tough conversation to have with a client either, right? We hired the best talent we could find in the market. So, and they're like, okay, great, I got the best talent. So they'll take the better, the best talent that they can get over the person being in the room with them, like the physical closeness.
And for like a macroeconomic perspective, I remember when I was at TELUS during the peak of the hiring, the FTE contractor agency rate was probably like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. There was a ton of folks in the contractor and agency world at the time. Yeah. Over your 20 years, Josh, what balance do you find is typical? Maybe in the boom times, it goes heavily on the contractor agency side, and then maybe in the lean times, they wind down. But what is normal across a lot of clients to have, like, in terms of FTE to agency and contractor ratios?
Yeah. So the answer is it completely varies. But somewhere generally, historically, around 80% FTE and 20% freelance/contract. That is completely dependent on how much of your business is retainer based, and so predictable revenue, so forecasted revenue, because a client signed a contract for a 12-month retainer that renews each year for 3 to 5 years. And so when you've got a retainer based client, you actually know the revenue's coming in, and you would actually likely hire full-time people that are either dedicated or partly dedicated to their business, which the client typically actually requests, right? They want people that know their brand and their business really well. And then contract/freelance, somewhere in that 20% market completely. There are some agencies out there that are like operate fully freelance / contract. And then I've worked at agencies that have been almost 100% full-time employment, because those agencies just they wanted the FTEs, and for the reasons I just mentioned. So, but yeah, and then what that does, so contract / freelance and agency in a downturn, so in a recession, when you have to do a headcount reduction, you actually have the ability to potentially end those contracts if you need to, right? Or reduce the size of the agency team, or slow down some of the projects. So that gives the marketing teams the ability to do that, right? Without having to do layoffs on their own team. Typically, headcount reduction on their own teams is kind of a last resort. Obviously, right now we're seeing that in a lot of organizations, hence this conversation and podcast. So, but yeah, there's definitely a mix of both. Allows agencies to staff according to the ebb and flow of the work.
And Reece, as a recruiter, how do you navigate this conversation when people know that agencies are some of the first removed from tech companies? But on the other hand, I haven't personally read about major layoffs at agencies. Maybe they're just better at kind of navigating the PR space. But how do you navigate that when you're going into an interview with a potential external candidate?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I can speak candidly from an internal hiring standpoint where we are at the moment. So as a business, we're actually starting to see a lot more demand in hiring contractors. Before, we were actually very low on the contractor percentage, and now we're starting to see that increase for a lot of reasons Josh mentioned, especially with shorter term contracts. It's going to help us do the work, and rather than it will change, and I don't want to put people off, rather than investing in more junior talent and building them up over the time, we're actually seeing now skewing more on the more senior folks that need minimal oversight, that can come in and actually produce that revenue from day one, especially in these macroeconomics. So from an internal side, we are starting to see more contractors being hired. How do I have that conversation with people? Exactly how I just said it then, being very, very very, very straight and to the point.
Honest.
Like, look, we have people that were traditionally completely full-time and only look for full-time work, but you have to stress to them, like, look, in this macroeconomics, like, you may have to change and be a contractor. You may have to change tact, and hey, it's not as sort of long-term, but it's still a foot in the door. So that'd be my bit of advice to people that have never considered contract, that are struggling in this market. For now, maybe that's something you have to pick up.
Agreed. And contract work can lead to full-time, right? Exactly. Either at that company or another company, right? It's still experience.
And depending too on what your area of expertise is, contracting can also be very financially advantageous for you as an individual. I know when I have my own, contracts, and I'm running my business more full-time, the financial upside for me is a no-brainer in a lot of ways. So I know that there are some roles that it's not quite that same situation, but if you have a little bit more of a niche type skill set, you could definitely come out ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to kind of transition to out of the episode by kind of talking about future projections, tips, and resources. Mm-hmm. So we'll go into like future projections. So the next 12 months, I feel like we're seeing little green shoots of growth in the sector. The layoffs are slowing. We're seeing kind of little kind of interest rate things. Like, how will the agency industry change in the next 12 months? So we'll start with Rebecca on this one.
Oh goodness, I don't know that I'm an expert enough to give anything of major value here. So I'm actually just going to pass it off to Josh and Reece as our more in-house experts in this area.
Who has the crystal ball, right? it obviously it's always hard to say and predict. So based on our conversation and what I'm seeing, I'm wondering if, to Reece's point, there will be more contract work, at least in the next 12 months, as some companies go through their uncertainty, right? Hopefully the wave of tech layoffs is done. I'm still reading some headlines of some companies like going through them. Yeah, but I do wonder if contract work will increase, at least in the next little while, because agencies, and that would be as a result of agencies not wanting to make the commitment to an employer to hire on a full-time employee, not knowing that the work is there, right? So yeah, so one of the things to top up on, or just echo what Reece has said, is if you're out there looking for work and you typically have been a full-time permanent employee and you're not finding, definitely consider contract work. And Rebecca's absolutely right. It can really be financially rewarding. And I've seen, I mean, you have a very, very good chance of potentially getting hired as a result of taking a 3 to 6 month contract, or a 12-month maternity contract is another really great option. Get your foot in the door, network within that organization, and then you'll be like all the more better set up to potentially take on a full-time role, right?
I have a couple of points on this. I know we haven't got too long, so I'll try and speed through it. Couple of points I want to make for people searching for a role. So we touched on the contract side. The second one is try and follow the trends in the market. I know that's very easy just to say from an internal recruiter, but try to see where is booming at the moment, especially within technology, and then identify the top companies in them spaces, because they're probably going to be the ones hiring, and you're not always going to find at this moment the perfect job that you're looking for. Is a big aspect I want to stress. You may have to find a job that's a 1-2 year stopgap to get where you want to get to. So for a prime example, if you're really passionate to get into product management, maybe there's not tons of product management roles, especially from the junior side out there at the moment. Can you look for roles which have similar competencies, customer success, client success, that are going to transfer into a potential product role in the future? So you may have to take something a little bit different to get to where you want to be, is a big one. And then the third one is, if you're out of work, treat finding a job like a full-time job. It's not easy. Like, personalization and networking is so important. You're not, if you're lucky, of course, can you still apply for jobs? Absolutely, please still do. But it's a lot less chance of you just applying for a job and getting one than actually, as Rebecca was saying, someone will introduce you to someone, network, get people to refer you into the business. Like, it's super important that you actually go above and beyond in these markets. And I can talk all day on this, but I'll cut it off.
I'll top up there to say there's like an idea concept called compounding effort. And so I know that especially in the job hunt, it can be really demotivating when you don't get a response at all, when you get the first interview and then they ghost you. Like, there's different scenarios that can be demotivating, but for the person looking for a job to know that the effort that you put into the last potential hire, potential job that you're applying for, is actually effort that's goes towards your next potential role. And so you've improved your resume, you've improved your, the questions that you bring to the table. So you continually improve upon yourself, even though you might not have gotten that role. And then I just want to echo, double click on what Reece just said around, like, sometimes the stepping stone, some roles are a stepping stone to get to where you want to go. And that stepping stone is actually just important as the end goal, right? Because you can't get to where you want to go without the experience to help you get there. So maybe it is that you take a 12-month contract that you wouldn't normally take because, it's just not normally your thing, but that 12-month contract could be a stepping stone to full-time, or, a more junior role, right? That's another thing to consider as well. Maybe you need to take a step into a more junior role that you wouldn't normally take if you're not finding that there's a lot out there. But again, that is still experience, and it's still a stepping stone to where you want to get to go, right?
There is no shame in starting out as a receptionist, is there?
Exactly. No, there's, yeah.
Yeah, that
You can,
reception job led me to, a connection, which led me to a connection, which led me to a connection, like they're all those experiences tie together.
yeah, yeah. My 20 years of experience thus far is starting at a reception desk and working into a C-suite
Completely.
role, right? So it's definitely. I saw like an image of people, like I think it was on LinkedIn or Instagram or something a couple of days ago. It was like the career path, and it was like like a squiggle.
Yes.
It's definitely not a straight line career path. Your career path can be a squiggle. It can be like lots of steps.
Yeah.
But
One of my favorite podcasts, other than this one, obviously, is Christina Halverson's Content Strategy podcast. And she starts every interview with the same question is, tell me about your journey into content strategy. And you never hear the same story twice. We've all had these like random, circuitous, fortuitous, serendipitous experiences that lead down this absolutely bizarre trail to where we currently are.
it's a great like team building exercise, actually, or like interview question, frankly, around like how did you get into this industry, and like there's so many interesting stories of like people, where they came coming from different countries or different degrees, and so yeah, it's actually one of the wonderful, I would say one of the wonderful things working agency side is you do have a total mix of experience, education, personality, and so it can make it fun and exciting, challenging as well.
So the last question is resources. So this could be a newsletter you love in the space. It could be a podcast, like Rebecca mentioned one. It could be a book. And some people have mentioned books that are related to job hunting, and some people have mentioned books that are related to introspection and kind of discovering yourself, which leads to the career you want. So I'm going to start with Rebecca, and then, so do you have anything that kind of you'd recommend for the audience?
Put me on the spot. I'm going to shamelessly plug the conference that I just actually co-chaired. Go to conferences, go to in-person meetups, networking. You will find like-minded people who will support you, who will get your name across the right desks, and who will be there to help pick you up after that disappointing, sorry, you didn't get chosen. So people, that's my resource.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm going to cheat a little bit and not say a specific one, but yeah, I agree. Like going to in-person meetups is invaluable, and when you go, bring your full self to that. It's tough, especially because a lot of them are after work. It might be later in the evening, but bring your full self, because then you know deep down that you've done the best that you can. If you go sit in the back row, don't really speak to anyone, there's no point in going. So look at meetups in your area, go to as many as you can, and honestly, the power of network and controlling your controllables is so important.
The best advice I ever got was from a good friend of mine. I was going to my first networking event after I'd moved here to Calgary. I said, oh, like I'm an introvert. Like I'm just like, I don't really want to be doing this. Like this is not my thing. It was like a cold, wintry night. And she said, go into the bar, get one drink, talk to one person, stay for 1 hour. If after you've done all three of those things, you haven't met anybody interesting, you're allowed to leave.
Yeah.
So, and it worked.
You do have to force yourself. I'm actually not like people think I'm an extrovert because I can be quite expressive, but when I walk into a room and I don't know anybody, I'm very shy. So it does take a lot of courage, but absolutely put yourself out there. And if you are shy and about being in a room, just leverage digital, right? So like to Reece's point, like LinkedIn is such an amazing networking tool. Grow your network on LinkedIn, link with people, send people messages. Like to Rebecca's point earlier, maybe because we're Canadian, but people are very friendly, right? And want to support. If people reach out to me, I want to support them in their career journeys and give them advice and so on and so forth, right? Yeah.
Fantastic. And I will be putting all these kind of resources and things discussed in the topic in the kind of show notes after on YouTube. So for anyone wanting to catch that conference that Rebecca mentioned, I'll put the link in there. So I'd like to thank our guests. So I'll quickly flash up the QR codes again. So if you want to connect with Reece, that is Reece's link. We have Josh as well and Rebecca. And as I wrap up, I'm going to give a preview to our next episode. So our next episode is the last of the season, and it's May 29th at 3 p.m. And it's an all-female panel, and we'll be discussing unique ways that women can succeed in technology. So see you then. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.